Single-hearted devotion. The book of Ruth is one of the small books in the Bible. No one knows who wrote this book or where it was written. Based on its content and style, it can be assumed it was written in or around 1000 BC. Some Bible scholars think Samuel is the author. Ruth is the story of an embittered woman, Naomi, and a kind, loving daughter-in-law, Ruth. Naomi had many good qualities, and indeed we can learn many beautiful lessons from her life. But as the intention of this book is to highlight Ruth's humility and single-hearted devotion to God when all odds seemed against her, we will consider only how Naomi was detrimental to the spiritual progress of her daughter-in-law. We find Naomi bitter with God, but Ruth, with the help of Boaz, is able to bring fullness into Naomi's life. From the life of Ruth, we learn so many beautiful lessons. Many wonderful truths are exemplified in her story. But just as Daniel's beautiful history hinged on his purposing in his heart not to defile himself, the story of this Moabitish widow's journey into the lineage of the Messiah hinged on her decision to follow Naomi and her single-hearted devotion to the God she had come to know through her. We can see the beautiful picture of how a Gentile received inheritance among the saints through a gracious kinsman redeemer, and therefore we do well to learn what we can from her decision that we might win the heart of our kinsman redeemer. We see Christian love in action and its powerful effects on people. Although the word love is not mentioned in the book even once, we may not see in any other book such unselfish and holy love as seen in this story. The book begins with 3 funerals. In chapter 1 verse 3, Elimelech, the head of the family, dies. In verse 4, Ruth is married, and in verse 5, she is already a widow. Her brother-in-law also dies, leaving her widowed mother-in-law in a foreign land with 2 husbandless, childless daughters-in-law. Yet God had a purpose in all this sorrow. The book ends in great joy. The book has 4 chapters. Chapter 1, chapter of weeping. Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah are crying. Chapter 2, chapter of working. Throughout this chapter, Ruth is seen working. Chapter 3, chapter of waiting. Ruth is asked to wait to marry Boaz. Chapter 4, chapter of wedding. Ruth gets married to Boaz. There is no other book in the Bible in which devotion to God is so vividly portrayed. A study of this book is therefore a great incentive to all Christians who seek a deeper spiritual life, and especially to those who have dedicated their lives to the service of God. Ruth never went back to Moab. To the very end, she kept her dedication and devotion to God and to the truth. Her life is a classic illustration to St. Paul's challenge. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. Romans 8:35-37. It is not surprising, therefore, that God honored Ruth through a Gentile woman, and that one belonging to a race that was so abominable to God that they were forbidden to come into the house of God up to the 10th generation. She was elevated to such an extent that one whole book in the Bible is named after her and devoted to describing her dedication to the living God. The book has only 4 chapters, comprising only 85 verses in all, but in them is a mine of wealth. The story reveals how discouragement can be turned into encouragement, how bitterness can be turned to sweetness, how barrenness can be turned to fruitfulness, how poverty can be changed into prosperity, how loneliness can be changed into friendship and fellowship, how utter despair can be changed to blessed hope, and how mourning can be changed into dancing. Of the 66 books comprising the Bible, only 2 are named after women. One is the Book of Esther and the other the Book of Ruth. We see a few contrasts between these 2 books. In Ruth, a Gentile woman marries a Jew. In Esther, a Jewish woman marries a Gentile. Ruth begins with a famine and Esther with a feast. Ruth ends with the birth of a baby and Esther with the hanging and death of an enemy. Nearly 3,000 years have elapsed, but Ruth's story is still a great favorite and many people name their daughters Ruth. Had Ruth gone her own way, she would not have been able to enter the inheritance of Israel and the lineage of Christ. By following Naomi, she was led to the man who would be her husband and with whom she would receive a great inheritance. If we, like Ruth, make a decision to follow the living God, not for a material blessing or other temporal benefit, but with the desire to know God more fully, we will soon meet Jesus, our heavenly bridegroom, and go to the undefiled and unfading inheritance reserved for us in heaven. For next study, subscribe the channel and follow the videos regularly. Thank you.